Hello everyone, my name is Kennedy-Compston CEO and founder of EnterpriseRed. We've been in business for about 5 years, more actually, and we're focusing specially on cybersecurity solutions for our customer base, which is quite broad. Today I'm going to talk about the cybersecurity problem and the issues that are facing people involved with any organization around the need for taking cybersecurity a little more seriously. So I'm going to provide a snapshot of where we are currently, some of the challenges that are facing companies, and what we can likely expect to see in 2020. So just to summarize, 2019 was a very bad year for data security. We had an average cost of data breach of just under $4 million. That's per breach. The number of data breaches increased by about 54%, particularly in the first half of 2019. And we had 4,000 disclosed breaches globally, and who knows how many were not disclosed for political or commercial reasons with companies. And in total, we had more than 4.1 or 4 billion records exposed. That's data instances where you could be a credit card file, or a file that's in a repository or anything else like that. That is a significant increase from the previous year and does mark a major change in the way cyber criminals are targeting companies. So the impact of this, and that's the real world impact, that the consumer and regulatory bodies are holding companies to account for data breaches. This is getting more poignant, and the regulatory regime for different organizations is getting more serious and more tightly controlled. More to the point, in a survey in October 2019, found that 81% of customers are likely to cancel their online account after a data breach. Well, clearly that has a massive business impact on any organization, and it's difficult to actually calculate the loss of a customer. Typically, it will take 7 times more effort to get a new customer on board than to keep their existing customer base. And as I mentioned, there is a growing regulatory trend which is going to increase the importance of data security in 2020. So most of you are familiar with GDPR. This has been around now for a couple of years. This is getting more serious. They're getting bigger staff based upon fines they're giving companies who do provide data breaches. So they're going to be focusing on a lot more organizations this year. And in addition, there are other US and emerging regulatory requirements such as CCPA and others that are going to additionally impact companies' behavior. If you're in the financial services example, you have additional regulatory requirements such as MiFID II for recording of voice, PCI DSS compliance if you're dealing with any form of payment or credit card transaction. And that's going to get worse, depending particularly on the sector that you're involved in. So let's talk about the beleaguered CISO, I call it. Now this could be an individual in an organization. It could be, in some companies, a team of people who are dealing within the IT function on cybersecurity particular areas. So it could be a CTO, could be other functions, but the essence is the Chief Information Security Officer and what they do. So typically, these people have to wear multiple hats. They'll report into the board, primarily the finance director. They report into the audit or regulatory teams, and they also report into operations. So you've got 3 bosses minimum, perhaps more, depending on the size of company. The problem is you're dealing with a moving target all the time. So many things are all changing constantly. This makes the job of the CISO or equivalent function very difficult. And typically the average tenure of a person or team in that function is around 18 months. And that could be a combination of burnout, frustration of the job, lack of control, or just doing the wrong thing or perceived by the board to be not performing. So they've got responsibility, but little or no autonomy to decide what they do to help secure the company against cybersecurity threats and data breaches. Each project typically has to be justified. Most projects in cybersecurity are not budgeted for. Therefore, each one has to be justified through a business case, which is very time consuming for the CISO in order to justify the reason for having the cybersecurity solution that they think is going to help solve their problems. Now, on the ground, of course, there are multiple vendors, and Gartner reports meant to help. They actually confuse, because depending upon the type of product and classification that Gartner attribute to cybersecurity solutions, it actually causes potentially more confusion than clarity with a lot of companies, CISOs. But they do refer to Gartner a lot because that's one of the standard bodies for recommendation on particular technologies. Making this a lot worse is that there are a large number of vendors, more than 1,200, and increasing all the time. This is fueled by startups out of the US, Israel, and the UK, and other countries, with VC-backed money who want short-term returns, all of whom are going to help solve a particular problem. But when you look at it in total, there are so many vendors, it makes it very difficult to see the wood for the trees. Making everything a lot worse is that there's no silver bullet to cybersecurity. Typically, it has to be a multi-layered approach, and different products and solutions will fit into different parts of that multi-layered approach. Think of it like layers of an onion. The vendors don't help themselves either. The messaging that they put out is unclear. There are a lot of TLAs, the 3-letter and 4-letter acronyms and buzzwords, which is typical of any IT or any industry, in fact. But the fact that there is lack of clarity makes it very difficult for the CISO or their equivalent function in a company to select clearly what product is best or solutions are going to be best for them. So now let's turn our attention to where we think there's going to be the biggest forms of risk for cybersecurity this year. The first one, probably not surprisingly, is insider threats. Could be the person next door, the IT admin sitting next to you, or it could be some disgruntled employee who's been there 30 years, who a boss doesn't particularly like, who wants to leave, but before they leave, they're going to get all the data they can so that they can either sell it or use it in the next job. That is a common thing, and in fact accounts for about a third of all cybersecurity breaches. Phishing scams have been around for a long time, but you've got variations on phishing, smishing, which is around text messaging that do the same, spear phishing attacks, all of these different variations which basically target, and whale phishing, who target the senior executives in a company. These scams are extremely advanced, and they're getting more advanced by the month. And to actually respond proactively to that is very difficult. So you need sets of tools that help you be proactive to stop it happening in the first place, and also educate your team within a company to stop doing stupid things like opening an attachment from an unknown sender. There are exposed databases as another factor. Now, a lot of companies are moving to public cloud environments from their own on-premise environment, and that is exposing databases. If you're going to Azure or AWS, they're the two most common ones. Some companies are reticent in putting the data there because they have a nervousness about exposing their precious data from the company within a public cloud. But there is a drive to cloud, and that's not going to stop. But that represents a risk, because when a database is outside of the control of a company, there's more chance of it being infiltrated by somebody who's looking to look for a data breach or to begin exposure of their data. The fourth one is around fatigued IT admins. The nature of the cybersecurity monitoring is a constant moving target, as I mentioned before. It causes fatigue in the IT admins in their role, and they can easily miss cyber threats through fatigue. Now, if you have a lot of larger organizations have a security operations center where you'd have a team of people looking at a pile of screens with tools in place for cybersecurity, they can easily miss things, especially if they're tired. That's also put out to external companies like a managed service, and the same will apply to them too. So having the human factor in cybersecurity, if they're tired or fatigued, is a major problem. And the other one, number 5, is wrong priorities at board level. There is still a perception at the C-suite level that the cybersecurity risks are less than they are. In a recent survey, the C-suite saw 6% of the board looking at or perceived data breaches, whereas at the coalface, if you like, with the CISO or the IT security professionals in the company, they see it as 63%. There's a huge disconnect between the two. I think half of the problem here, of course, is that because cybersecurity is unseen, it's in the cloud. It's like it's a computer thing. You can't physically see it. You don't know what is coming. And unlike something which is a fixed asset like a car, which is obvious, you can see that, but not cybersecurity threats. And that is part of the issue. So most people have heard of the Internet of Things by now. It could be a toaster, connected fridge, could be a car that's autonomous. This market is estimated by IDC to be 80 billion connected devices in the next few years, in the next 5 years. That's not going to go away, and the IT security around this area is going to be increasingly of a major concern to companies, because if people can access like a printer or a toaster or a fridge, they can get into the network through that back door, and it's a problem, and that's going to make cybersecurity data breach risk significantly bigger. So what do we do now? Well, we, I think, have now to start taking cybersecurity seriously. It's a big area. It is confusing for the reasons I mentioned, but you could treat it as a positive sign. If cybersecurity solutions and resilience is put in place correctly, it could be seen or help create a business advantage for your company. It isn't just a tax. It isn't just a regulatory, oh, I've got to fill in a spreadsheet just because I have to be compliant. That is a very cynical response to what is a major problem. But if it is turned into a positive, it can create a major business advantage to you. For example, if you're part of a supply chain, it could be that you need the minimum of Cyber Essentials Plus or ISO 27001 compliance for them to trade with you. But if you're dealing with customers and they know that your company is being pen tested every 2 weeks, for example, that's going to give them the confidence that you are in control of your environment and more likely to use you as a customer. Going back to the earlier point, with 80+% of people losing faith in a company after a data breach, if it's done in a right way, you're going to create more customer loyalty through having proper cybersecurity resilience in place. So to summarize, EnterpriseRed, we bring clarity to this area. We can bring clarity and structure to your cybersecurity puzzle, and we're here to help you. So please call us, and we'd be happy to speak to you. Thank you.